Welcome, everybody, to All Church Sunday School. Yay! All Church Sunday School.
Yay, and I'm glad you're back.
I am glad to be back. And you and Austin did a great job while I was away.
Well, thanks. It was weird, though.
No, it was good. I liked it.
For me, felt weird. It's better to have somebody to
It's definitely
spar
hard
with.
to just do a monologue, don't you think?
I felt a little like Mr. Rogers sometimes. What do you think?
I don't know. What do you think? Let's see. So we continue with our exploration of a book that I love so much. I hope that we've persuaded you by now that you really need this book. You need it on your shelf. You need the inspiration. I noticed that on the front of the book, An Altar in the World, Barbara Brown Taylor, the Dallas Morning News is quoted as saying, "Not a page turner, it is a page lingerer."
I saw that too, and that's
It's so true.
so true.
It's just lovely. And you stop and you read a sentence again, and it just soaks into you and into your heart and your soul. And I'm just, this is a geography of faith. So we're exploring all of the holy places every day in ordinary life where we
and not
stop.
just places, but ways, and yeah. It's
So many ways that God provides for us an altar in the world. Not that we want to encourage everybody, forget about going to church, but all around us every day, God is at work. And if we're paying attention, which is the chapter in front of us today, if we're paying attention, it can be holy ground. So you have a recent experience of paying attention.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So I recently discovered an app called Pray on the Go, and every morning it has a little song, a scripture reading of the daily lectionary, and then just questions based on that scripture. Then they read the scripture again and a little prayer at the end. It's about 15 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes, and I usually start my day with that.
So you're not on the go when you're doing that.
I'm
You're
not. I use it
in
as
the
a
car or something.
No,
like
you
that.
could do it easily that way, but I like to just listen to it first thing. But on that app, they also have different exercises, different practices that you can do, and one of them was a prayer walk. And so I put my little earbuds in and just went on a walk with this app, and it was telling me to pay attention to things and to notice everything that I could while I was on this walk, and not to do a power walk or anything like that, just to meander, to linger, as this book was described. And so I was walking. I live in a condo complex, and so I was sort of walking up and down every building, in between all the buildings, and I turned a corner, and I saw this glorious tree that I'd never noticed before. It almost looked like an elephant foot. I mean, it was so big.
And you had never noticed it before?
I really had never noticed it before because it's down from, I just don't really go that far. And it just sort of took my breath. And as I kept walking, there was a tree branch that was low hanging. And so I reached up and sort of swung underneath it. And as I looked, there were like June bug or some kind of bug that sheds its skin. They're little,
cicadas?
Yeah, they're the cicadas. Their little shells were stuck to the bottom of that tree. There were 3 of them. And, the bugs were long gone, but their shells were there. I never would have noticed that if I hadn't been...
I love that.
Yeah, and then right as I came out, swung underneath that tree, there was like a little feather or some kind of plant floating seed or something that... It reminded me of that feather on Forrest Gump. You remember?
Oh, yes.
And it just went and went and went, and I just watched it until it went away. And so there were several little things like that. It was a 40-minute walk, and there were several things that I noticed that I knew I wouldn't have if I hadn't been...
On the app, was someone speaking to you on the app continuously, or would there be empty spaces and then another suggestion?
There would be music, like nice soft music, and every once in a while the voice would come in and make a suggestion or remind you to be present or to notice or to,
And it really
touch
changed
something.
your experience, didn't it?
It really did, because I know I wouldn't have noticed those things had I not.
Probably all about completing your walk. checking that off your list,
Yeah.
moving forward, being purposeful, but that's not the
How
same
many
thing
steps
as
did I
paying
get?
attention.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is that. So let me tell you a story that a picture from a walk. When I lived in Kingwood, you could walk down by the San Jacinto River, and there was just a beautiful park there, but you wound around some roads to get to the park. And it was my day off, so I was walking early in the morning, and it was fall. And the sun was coming in and out behind the clouds, and temperature was a little cooler, just beginning to feel like fall. So it was a great day to be walking. And I came around a corner, and these were tall pine trees, really walking through some woods. And I came around a corner, and the sun peeked out from behind the clouds, and I looked up, and there were spider webs all over, hanging from almost every branch of every tree. And because it was moist, there'd been some fog earlier in the morning. There were jewels on all of the spider webs, like diamonds sparkling. It just, and I had my phone with me, and I took a picture. But there are things that your eyeballs can capture that never work out when you try to turn it into a photograph. And I will never, and in a minute you're going to see that I found a picture like that, because I knew I wanted to tell you the story about paying attention. I think it would have been possible not to look up and not to have seen those spider webs.
Right.
And so what is it?
Which are so beautifully intricate anyway, even without the
And so
dew
every line was like this graphic wonderland, because every piece of the web was accentuated because of the water droplets on it. So yes, what you were admiring was the handiwork of the spiders. And I was wondering how many spiders it took, because webs were everywhere. Wow. And it wasn't like arachnophobia where I was like, oh my gosh, spiders. It was just breathtaking. It was so beautiful. So,
yeah, that's nice.
Paying attention. We're going to talk today in this chapter, chapter 2, about the art of paying attention, and Barbara Brown Taylor is going to connect it with reverence. And so I just loved everything she wrote about this. And she tells a story at the beginning of being a small girl, and her dad says, hey, I want you to see something. And they go out onto a deck and lay up and look at the stars, and a particular thing is happening that he wants her to see. And it begins some reflection in this chapter about experiences she had with her dad. But would you read that a little excerpt about what she saw when she looked up into the night sky?
She says, as hard as I have tried to remember the floor plan of that house that they lived in, I can't. But she does remember the wooden deck that you were just talking about lying on her back. And I saw a shower of falling stars. I did not know then that they were called the Tears of St. Lawrence, or that they returned every August. So
now she goes on, so she's remembering that experience with her dad, and the experience, she says, of feeling so small and seeing something so majestic and so amazing. And the stars were falling. And you can Google Tears of St. Lawrence and see what that event is. Kind of meteors, I think, is the way it was described when I Googled it. But she also talks about reverence having to do with her dad and other practices that you would not think signified as a reverent practice. Right. So one of those has to do with his tools and how he kept his tools very carefully and
required her to.
And taught her how to clean a gun and take it apart and clean it. And so read a little bit of that, would you?
When I used the tools?
Yes, the tool part.
She says, when I used one of my father's tools, he expected me to clean it with a wire brush and rub it down with a light coat of oil before putting it back where I'd found it. My father's tools lasted forever. If I cut myself with one of them, he washed the wound with hydrogen peroxide and dabbed it with first aid cream before covering it with a Band-Aid that was exactly the right size. My father's bandages were works of art.
How interesting for her to remember those details, how precise he was about storing tools. My dad had a workbench in the garage, but he didn't have any display of tools like that. How about your dad? Were tools something that he really kind of guarded, took good care of?
No, not really. I mean, he wouldn't abuse them, but I mean, they lived in a toolbox, and they weren't polished and displayed or anything like that. But
when I'm looking at this picture that goes along with this slide, that's a workbench. Now, if you had a workbench, I think, Shannon, it would look like that workbench. Because you're kind of like that about your things.
Yeah.
Your office is very orderly when I go in there, and
most of the time,
you know where things are, and there's nothing sloppy in there at all. Read one more paragraph here. I learned reverence from my father. Would you read that?
Yeah. For him, it had nothing to do with religion and very little to do with God. I think it may have had something to do with his having been a soldier, since the exercise of reverence was the proper attitude of a small and curious human being in a vast and fascinating world of experience. Full appreciation of our world requires close attention to the way things work, including one's own participation in their working or not working.
Close attention to the way things work.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
I think she's making a reverence bigger than what I would think it would be. This rhythm of life, and being respectful, being attentive. Isn't that a broader understanding of reverence than how you would define that word before you read this?
Yes, but I like it.
I'm trying to think of an example. I think someone who loves to cook has kind of a reverence for cooking, for, where the measuring cups are and how you put things away. Oh my gosh, but you're all about putting things back where they belong. So does your kitchen have a certain orderly reverence in it, everything in its place?
Yeah.
So that sense of who I am in the scheme of things, in the larger scheme of things, feeling kind of small in a positive way. Like when you go to the mountains and you feel small because life is much bigger than me.
Right. And understanding one's place. And I know that can sound demeaning in a way, but we're not the center of everything. We're not. There's so much that's bigger than we are.
There's something comforting about understanding our smallness in a way. You're right. That's not demeaning the value of a human being, but it's saying, in the scheme of things,
yeah, I remember,
just kind of get over yourself.
Right. I remember my sister's the first time she ever saw the ocean, when she was maybe 2 or something, and
was she looking at the Atlantic since you were?
We went to the beach one weekend, and she had never been, and I just remember her face when we came up over the dunes, and she saw it she called it the big great water is what she called it. And
does she remember that when you remind her of that?
No, I'll have to ask her. The big great water.
I remember being in Colorado when my boys were little with another family, and we had been inside eating supper in a cabin and came out for the first time with no moon out and just Colorado stars in the sky. And the little boy who was with us looked up and went, "Hey, who turned on the stars?" Because it was just, in living in a city in Texas, he had never seen stars look like that. So here's the picture that I found that I wanted to show you that reminded me of my amazing spiderweb revelation. Would you read these 2 comments?
Sure.
One is from Paul Woodruff.
Yep, he says, reverence is the virtue that keeps people from trying to act like gods. To forget that you are only human, to think you can act like a god, is the opposite of reverence. That's sort of what I was getting at a while ago. We need to remember our quote-unquote place.
Our place in the created
order, yes. And then Taylor says, an irreverent soul who is unable to feel awe in the presence of things higher than the self is also unable to feel respect in the presence of things it sees as lower than the self.
Isn't that an interesting way of describing both ends of taking ourselves too seriously?
Right.
Thinking we're more than we are and failing to see the small things that are significant. I took a group on a mission trip to the Four Corners area, and we stayed on a Navajo reservation. And it was half teenagers and half adults, and it was really great experience. And the first day, some leaders from the reservation were there welcoming us and explaining things, and these were all Texas teenagers. One of our teenagers saw a spider going by and stomped it. And the Navajo woman who was speaking to us said, Sister Spider has a right to be here too. She has a place on this planet. We want to be respectful. And you could just see Texas kids who'd never thought about any right that an insect would have. I mean, they were just baffled by that. Mm-hmm. But I've carried, ever since that experience, I've carried spiders outside when I find them in my house. Not squished, but, here, would you like to be out here instead of in my house? So even that respect for tiny things. Mm-hmm. And for things, the significance of that tiny thing. If I'm in perspective, my value, my worth, my whatever, then everything else falls into place as well. Mm-hmm. The things that are much bigger than me, mm-hmm. the tiny things that are also part of God's creation, mm-hmm. it all falls into place as we pay attention. So this is a broader understanding of reverence. And one of the things that Barbara Brown Taylor suggests is, okay, if you want to practice paying attention.
I loved this. Loved how she described this.
Go sit next to a body of water.
Or anywhere outside.
Anywhere. And
maybe
and I found this wonderful painting. What do you think about it? Called Sitting by the River. So go sit by the water or anywhere and just sit and pay attention to what's going on. Don't move. Don't pick up your book and start reading. Just sit. Just pay attention. Mm-hmm. And notice, how the breeze is moving the grass and just notice what's going on. Just sit.
And she mentioned, seeing the ants carrying a dead bug and
you have to sit for a while to get to that level of detail, don't you think?
Yeah. She said at least 20 minutes.
So sit and pay attention. I love that, the simplicity of that. All right, here's something for you to read for us.
Okay. The practice of paying attention really does take time. Most of us move so quickly that our surroundings become no more than blurred scenery as we fly past on our way to somewhere else. We pay attention to the speedometer, the wristwatch, the cell phone, the list of things to do, all of which feed our illusion that life is manageable. Meanwhile, none of them meets the first criterion for reverence, which is to remind us that we are not gods.
One more sentence.
Reverence requires a certain pace. It requires a willingness to take detours, even side trips, which are not part of the original plan.
I love it. Mm-hmm. And so now we're going to look at a story that's a perfect example of that. Hero from Hebrew Scriptures who is willing to take a detour.
That's right.
And everything else. So I found this painting. What do you think, Shannon?
Yeah, that's cool. I've never seen that before.
Don't you love that?
Yeah.
And can you see the sheep are over on the ridge?
Oh, I missed that.
See, the sheep are all there. And you can see the bottom of Moses' feet. I love that. Look at the soles of his feet because he's on his knees and he's taken his sandals off, which God instructed him to do.
Yeah, now he's got grocery store feet.
And so will you read that story to us and let us think about how it was that Moses demonstrated the practice of paying attention?
Certainly. One day, Moses was tending the flocks of his father-in-law, Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. "This is amazing," Moses said to himself. "Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it." When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, "Moses, Moses." "Here I am," Moses replied. "Do not come any closer," the Lord warned. "Take off your sandals, for you're standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob." When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God.
Now, one of the things I love especially about Barbara Brown Taylor is how she tells the story that appears in Scripture. Mm-hmm. I love this story, first of all, and Moses' willingness to take a detour. But now, here's Barbara Brown Taylor commenting on what you just read. Would you read that for us?
She says, the bush required Moses to take a time out, at least if he wanted to do more than glance at it. He could have done that. He could have seen the flash of red out of the corner of his eye and said, oh, how pretty, kept right on driving the sheep. He did not know that it was an angel in the bush, after all. Only the storyteller knew that. Moses could have decided that he'd come back tomorrow to see if the bush was still burning, when he had a little more time. Only then he would not have been Moses. He would have been a guy who got away with murder, without ever discovering what else his life might have been about. What made him Moses was his willingness to turn aside. Wherever else he was supposed to be going, whatever else he was supposed to be doing, he decided it could wait a minute. He parked the sheep and left the narrow path in order to take a closer look at the marvelous sight. When he did, the storyteller says, God noticed. God dismissed the angel and took over the bush. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called out to him from the bush, Moses, Moses.
I love the way she tells that story. Mm-hmm. What made him Moses was his willingness to turn aside.
Mm-hmm. That the whole story of our faith would have been completely different had he not. It makes your mind go down so many different roads. Would God have reached out in a different way? Would it have been somebody else?
Somebody else, but not Moses. And she even suggests, as she's retelling the story, that God had let an angel take care of the bush, but then God was watching. Let's see what Moses does. Mm-hmm. See, not like, oh, well, I know what Moses is going to do. Wouldn't you think God knew exactly what Moses? But God is watching, like he set a little trap, and then Moses turns aside. He did it. And so God kind of brushes the angel aside. All right, get out of the way. I'll take it from here. Because Moses was willing to stop and consider something he couldn't explain.
And maybe it's always been this way, but I think especially now, it's hard for us to do that when your phone is always sending you somewhere, or we're so connected. I mean, there's no time to turn off.
That's right.
You remember, we may have talked about this before, but I just watched a couple of weeks ago, it's a movie called You've Got Mail, which I love, with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. And it's such it wasn't that long ago, mid-90s, late 90s, something like that. But when you had to sign on to the internet, you weren't connected all the time. You had to sit down and dial in and wait.
And then you would see, did somebody get me?
And then you turned it off.
Yeah.
And went on about your life.
You weren't always connected.
Right. And so I think now so many of us are distracted by our technology that it's hard to even notice.
Is it possible the pendulum is swinging a little back away from technology?
Well, it certainly is for me, but I don't know if that's
So maybe there will be, maybe not a complete generation that's, forget about technology, that's ruining the quality of my life. But maybe there are seasons as we move through our lifetime that we see what we've missed and we choose to detach ourselves from the technology for just a little while. So Moses stops. He's willing to turn aside. How often in your typical day are you willing to turn aside and get off the path of efficiency? You're a fairly efficient person, Shannon.
Yeah, I have to schedule my time off the path.
So spontaneity then seems like it's a piece of reverence then, right? Mm-hmm. The ability to be unscripted, to do something. Oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to drive over here and sit on that bench for 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Occasionally, I'll get up and walk around the building here at the church. I'll just listen to there's another podcast that I like. It's a poetry podcast.
And so you're listening and walking, stretching your legs.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I don't listen to anything, but I do that on occasion. But most of the time I have to schedule
most
my
of the time you're
time
very
off the path.
Efficient. I see you going past my office door, and you are a man on a mission. I never see you just
Sauntering.
wandering. No, sauntering. I never see you sauntering past my doorway. Not at all. Okay, here's something from Barbara Brown Taylor. The practice of paying attention is as simple as looking twice at people and things you might just as easily ignore. Like all the other practices in this book, paying attention requires no equipment, no special clothing, no green fees or personal trainer. You do not have to be in particularly good shape. All you need is a body on this earth, willing to notice where it is, and trusting that even something as small as a hazelnut can become an altar in this world. Do you remember the hazelnut story from the chapter? Mm-hmm. You do?
From Julian?
Yes, tell us about the hazelnut.
Well, Julian of Norwich was a mystic, a nun, and had been very ill, right? And I hope I remember this story correctly. Priest came to give her last rites, and when she saw the cross, she had a vision of Christ and was healed immediately, which sort of triggered these visions over time. And she kept diaries of those, and at one point saw a little something small in her hand about the size of a hazelnut, and wondered, knew that there was something special about it, but what was it that made it so special? And the answer was that God made it, and God loved it, and that was the beginning and the end of everything.
One of the things that I love about this book, and about I think anything that Barbara Brown Taylor writes, is this connection with ancient mystics and contemporary sensibilities. And I mean, she really does a lovely job of beginning and ending each chapter with some classic Christian writing, in addition to just the everyday idea of go sit by a river and look at the ants and decide.
And also, we didn't delve into it too much, but she also talked about how much easier it is to pay attention as it's related to nature and to feel the awe of God's creation through nature than it is other people, because
then
people get on our nerves.
But she said she did talk about riding the train or the subway,
right?
and just
practicing.
Sort of studying somebody. But you have sunglasses on, she said, so that people will. Why are you
Why
looking
are
at
you
me?
staring at me?
Stop
but
looking at me.
and she told a great story too about her annoyance at the bag boy at the grocery store who was putting cans on top of her mushrooms, her portobellos, and she got annoyed at first, and then noticed him and sort of put herself in his shoes at his age and in his situation, and it made her have a conversation with him instead of just being
softened her heart a little bit,
and she
made her
had a little let's put the heavy stuff on the bottom and the mushrooms on the top. And he said, "Oh, I didn't know those were mushrooms. They look gross." So, but I loved that story because it's just that so often we really just do see ourselves as the star of the show, and everybody else is the supporting characters.
Either supporting us or getting in the way of what we're trying to do.
And
so maybe our assignment for this next week is to see when we might turn aside like Moses, to give ourselves permission to take a detour and see where the detour leads us, see what God has to say to us in the detour. So when you and I talk next week, can we unpack whatever detour we took?
Sure. Now I have homework.
Just one detour in 7 days.
I'll do it.
Take one detour.
I'll do it.
And let's see what happens.
Okay.
I love this conversation. I hope that you will consider an altar in the world as something worthy of your time. Take a detour and order this book. We do not get a commission from book sales. This is really good.
It's a great book.
There is enough in this chapter that we just discussed to really take you on a journey of faith. So we look forward to continuing that journey with you. You too try to take a detour in the next week, and you can write to us at acss@uccftw.com and let us know about your detour. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye-bye.